Something deep inside you is wearing thin, and you don't even realize it. It's not your career, not your relationships, not your health that's eroding. It's something quieter, more invisible, but far more dangerous. What you're losing is self-respect. Not in loud, obvious ways, but in silence, in small concessions, in the little nods you give when you should shake your head. It's every time you force a smile you don't mean, every time you shrink to avoid confrontation, every time you say yes while your entire being screams no. This isn't a war you knew you were fighting, and that's the problem, because you're losing it by inches, not to enemies, not to betrayal or grand failures. You're losing it to your own choices, harmless-looking decisions made in the name of politeness, strategy, being liked. But there's a cost, a hidden one. These tiny decisions are like termites, hollowing out the structure of your dignity while you think everything is still standing. The worst part? You've been taught, indoctrinated even, to think this is noble. That being nice wins people over, that avoiding conflict keeps you safe, that being easygoing protects your peace. But the truth is, it doesn't. It strips you of your strength, of your presence, of your voice. And I'm not the only one who's seen it. Centuries ago, a man with a razor-sharp understanding of human nature warned against this very thing. Niccolo Machiavelli, misunderstood by many, feared by more, but never wrong about how the world works. He knew what people forget. Kindness, when offered without discretion, leads to your slow undoing, not physically, but mentally, socially, spiritually. It's a quiet unraveling. One day, you wake up, look in the mirror, and don't recognize the person staring back. A version of yourself that's been shaped more by what others expect than by what you truly believe. That's the cost of never standing firm. Every time you explain yourself when no explanation is owed, someone learns they have the right to question you. Every time you make yourself available without pause, someone decides your time isn't valuable. Every time you lower your standards for the sake of harmony, the world takes a note. You can be bent. That's how you become background noise. Predictable, domesticated, easy to overlook, and no one sounds the alarm when it happens. It's too quiet, too polite, too disguised as goodness. You'll notice it in subtle things. They stop asking for your input. Your opinion becomes an afterthought. People plan without you, decide without you. They interrupt you in conversations without thinking twice. Not because they hate you, but because you've trained them to believe that your voice is optional. You taught them that you'd rather be accepted than respected. And once that lesson is learned, it's hard to unteach. See, respect doesn't vanish in a single moment. It seeps away. A little here, a little there. 100 small interactions where you were too agreeable, too available, too afraid to be the one who says no. And that loss isn't loud. It's not dramatic, but it's real, and it compounds. Meanwhile, you keep hoping the world will see your heart, that they'll recognize your good intentions, that your patience will be rewarded. But the world doesn't operate on empathy. It operates on structure, power, presence. And, like it or not, those who rise to the top don't do so by being endlessly agreeable. They do it by being respected. And respect is earned not through likability, but through boundaries. That's the part people don't want to hear. That to truly command respect, you have to be willing to withhold, not your humanity, but your constant accessibility, your emotional openness, your willingness to play nice at the expense of your truth. And that doesn't mean becoming cruel. It means being deliberate, calculated, strategic in when and how you give your energy. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for fear-driven tyranny. He was highlighting a truth that still holds today. It's better to be feared than loved if you can't be both. That isn't about domination. It's about maintaining presence, distance, discipline. It's about not needing to be liked in order to feel worthy. So, the question becomes, are you living to be liked, or are you living with presence? Because real respect cannot be requested. It must be felt. Not by raising your voice, but by raising your standards. Not by arguing, but by stepping away when you're no longer valued. Not by pleasing, but by pausing, withholding, choosing when to speak and when silence says more. What you're about to understand is not just theory. It's a blueprint, a reality check, a look into how your own habits, things you believed were signs of strength, may be undermining your presence. And it's not your fault. You were raised on ideas like, always be polite, always give people the benefit of the doubt, always keep the peace. But these ideas, when unfiltered, become weapons, and they're aimed at your self-respect. Here's what no one wants to admit. It's not the cruelty of others that breaks you. It's your tolerance for it. It's your silence, your constant justifications. That moment when something feels wrong, but you say, it's okay. Because confrontation feels worse than pain. That instinct to over-explain because you don't want to be misunderstood, when in reality, you're just afraid of being disliked. You don't need to justify yourself to those already set on misunderstanding you. You don't need to be understood by people who don't care to listen. And you definitely don't need to make peace with people who find comfort in your weakness. Because every time you do, you give them permission to keep crossing lines. Every explanation, every apology for just existing as you are, it's another layer stripped from your dignity. Machiavelli was clear. The person who tries to please everyone ends up being consumed by everyone. Because unfiltered generosity, availability without discretion, tolerance without limits, these are not virtues. They are fractures, and through those cracks, resentment leaks in, disregard creeps in. You become familiar, predictable, and what's familiar often becomes invisible. So if you're wondering why people don't take your opinions seriously anymore, why your absence goes unnoticed, why you feel invisible in the rooms you used to command, it's because you've been too accessible, too understandable, too eager to be seen, to be liked, to be safe. But safety doesn't earn respect, boundaries do. And it all starts with one decision: to stop giving yourself away without a filter. That doesn't mean being distant or cold. It means knowing your worth, holding your ground, and not needing the approval of others to feel whole. That means not responding to every text, not explaining every emotion, not being available for every request. Because every time you do, you dilute your power. Here's a truth you've probably felt, but never said out loud. People don't cherish what's always within reach. They don't value what's predictable. They respect what has weight, what feels earned, what has limits. That's where your power lies, in scarcity, in knowing when to pull back, when to remain silent, when to leave a message unanswered, not to play games, but to let your energy speak louder than your words ever could. Respect doesn't come from being everywhere, all the time. It comes from being intentional, from understanding that sometimes your absence makes more noise than your presence ever could. And when you're not afraid to walk away, you become magnetic. Because those who can leave whenever they want are the ones who are valued the most when they choose to stay. Dependence on approval is a trap, and most people don't even know they're in it. They think they're being loyal, consistent, kind. But they're really just afraid to lose their spot, their role, their place in someone else's life. But here's the thing. If you need to constantly maintain your presence to feel worthy, it was never real to begin with. True respect allows you to be missed, to be remembered in silence, to say no without explanation, and still be honored for it. And it all falls apart when you confuse being visible with being valuable. You're not meant to be background noise in anyone's life. You're not decoration. You are the center of your own space, and it's your responsibility to protect that. Not with aggression, but with intention, with discipline, with quiet strength. So why do you over-explain? Why do you feel the need to narrate every decision? Because somewhere deep down, you've been taught that boundaries are rude, that silence is cold, that saying no is selfish. But the truth is, saying no is self-preservation, and boundaries are the only way to teach the world how to treat you. There's a kind of emotional generosity that feels noble, but it's dangerous when it becomes habitual. You give too much, not just your time, not just your attention. You give people access to your internal world. You let them read your emotions like open pages, as if they've earned that privilege just by being there. You explain, you clarify, you justify. Not because they ask, but because you've convinced yourself that being misunderstood is worse than being disrespected. And that's where the erosion begins. When you allow others to cross that emotional threshold without boundaries, you teach them something they were never meant to know, that your core is easily accessible, that your emotions are up for debate, that your heart is something they can poke at, question, interpret, without gloves, without care. But when everything about you is laid bare, nothing about you feels sacred. There is no reverence in something that is always available, no value in what requires no effort to reach. Respect isn't about being cold or aloof. It's about discretion, about deciding who gets what part of you and when. Machiavelli knew this. He didn't write about withholding as a punishment. He wrote about it as strategy. Power, he said, doesn't lie in constant exposure. It lives in silence, in the things left unsaid, in the quiet control of when to reveal and when to retreat. You talk too much. You offer too many explanations. You try too hard to make people understand your heart, your thoughts, your reasons. And they nod. They listen. Maybe. But more often than not, they stop hearing you. They skim over your words. They assume they know what's coming, because mystery has died, because there's no longer anything left to earn. See, the people who hold weight in a room are not always the loudest. They're the ones whose silence makes others lean in, the ones who speak less but are remembered more. That's not coincidence. That's presence. That's restraint. That's intentionality. And if you want to be respected, if you want your words to matter, then you need to speak less but mean more. But instead, what do? You apologize before offering a thought. You warn people that you might be wrong. You smile to soften your truth. You explain emotions as if they are inconveniences that need permission to exist. You preemptively defend your anger, your disappointment, your needs, because somewhere inside you, you still believe that being understood is the same as being valued. It's not. You don't need everyone to understand. You don't need everyone to agree. What you need is to stop bleeding your truth to people who haven't earned it. Because not everyone is ready to hold your vulnerability. Not everyone deserves a front row seat to your inner dialogue. And when you forget that, when you open yourself to the wrong people, you give them power not to care, but to use. They take your transparency and twist it into assumptions. They confuse your openness with permission to judge you. And that's the most painful kind of disrespect. The one you enable with your own hands. You think you're connecting, but you're offering yourself like a sacrifice. You're hoping your truth will protect you, but all it does is expose you. Not all vulnerability is strength. Vulnerability without discernment is danger. It's self-sabotage. Because when you reveal everything, people stop listening carefully. They start treating your soul like background noise. And then you feel it, the shift. They don't ask how you are anymore, because they already assume they know. They don't respect your opinions anymore, because you've diluted them with too many disclaimers. They don't see your strength anymore, because you've cloaked it in softness, in explanations, in endless emotional disclaimers. And still, you keep showing up. In every conversation, every event, every group chat. You think that consistency will earn respect. That if you're always there, always supportive, always loyal, they'll never forget you. But it's the opposite. You become furniture, familiar, taken for granted, always assumed, rarely acknowledged. Let me tell you something that hurts. Respect doesn't live in omnipresence. It lives in absence. In the pause you leave behind, in the echo of your presence once it's gone. It lives in your ability to withdraw without warning, without guilt, without explanation. Because the person who can walk away at any time is the one whose presence is most valued when they choose to stay. And that's a hard truth, because it demands that you give up your dependency on being included, that you stop proving your worth with presence, that you stop showing up just to remind people you exist. Your worth is not in how often you're seen, it's in the impact you leave when you exit. So, why can't you stop explaining? Why do you feel this compulsive need to narrate your intentions? Because somewhere in you is a seed of guilt, a guilt for being powerful, a guilt for having needs, a guilt for setting rules. You feel like having boundaries makes you harsh, that saying no is aggressive, that asking for space is selfish. But the truth is, it's not cruelty, it's clarity. You were never taught to govern your own emotional space. You were taught to be agreeable, to be pleasant, to avoid being too much. But by doing that, you let others define your limits. You gave away the map, and now you're lost in a world where people expect your compliance because that's what you always offered. But here's what Machiavelli understood that you've forgotten. Every powerful presence creates a ripple of discomfort, not because it's hostile, but because it demands attention. It forces people to pause, to reflect, to measure their approach. And that pause is where respect is born. The pause before they interrupt, the pause before they question you, the pause before they assume they know you. That pause is your shield, and you build it by enforcing boundaries without apology. You are not here to be everyone's comfort zone. You're here to set a standard, to shape the space around you. And that requires discomfort, not for you, but for those who try to test your limits. And yes, at times, that discomfort will make you look selfish. But there's a difference between destructive selfishness and strategic protection. The first says, I only care about me. The second says, I will care for myself first, because no one else will do it for me. That kind of self-focus is not cruelty, it's armor, it's clarity, it's strength. When you embrace that strength, things start to shift. You stop apologizing for being unavailable. You stop explaining your absence. You stop needing people to understand why you didn't reply, why you didn't show up, why you said no. And when you stop explaining, people start noticing. They speak with more care. They approach you differently, because now they know your space is not free. Your time is not open access. Your attention is not cheap. You go from being a background character in other people's stories to becoming a presence that reshapes the narrative, a presence with rules, with energy, with gravity. And that kind of presence, it can't be faked. It's earned through restraint, through consistency, through the quiet decision to no longer beg for value, but to command it. Here's the hard truth most people avoid. Others will treat you based on how you treat yourself. If you constantly justify your value, they'll question it. If you offer apologies for having standards, they'll push your limits. If you tolerate disrespect in silence, they'll interpret that silence as weakness. You teach others how to treat you, not with your words, but with your thresholds, your reactions, your decisions. And every time you say, it's okay when it's not, you're giving a class on how to hurt you without consequence. Machiavelli didn't write about dominance for dominance's sake. He wrote about stability, about creating environments where power is clear and cannot be ignored. You need that same clarity, not to control others, but to stop being controlled. You keep trying to be good, empathetic, reasonable. You want to believe that everyone means well, that every offense is just a misunderstanding, that every conflict can be resolved with conversation. But not all conflict deserves your energy. Not all disrespect is a misunderstanding. And not all people deserve your understanding. Sometimes the most mature thing you can do is say nothing. Not because you're above it, but because it's not worth it. Some offenses aren't corrected through dialogue. They're corrected by absence. Some people don't need to hear your truth. They need to feel your distance. That's how real change happens. Not through confrontation, but through the void your exit creates. Because when someone crosses a boundary and you stay, they learn that your standards are flexible. When someone disrespects you and you explain, they learn that your authority can be negotiated. And Machiavelli said it best. If someone challenges your rule and you don't respond with firmness, you open the door for more rebellion, more testing, more erosion. So it's time to stop treating your standards like suggestions. They're laws, not because you're a tyrant, but because your peace requires protection. And that protection begins with discomfort, with loss, with letting go of relationships that were built on your silence, not your truth. And yes, people will leave. Yes, they'll say you've changed. Yes, they'll call you cold. But what they're really saying is this: you're no longer easy to use. And that is the highest compliment you could receive. And now comes the part no one prepares you for. The moment after you change. The silence that follows your boundaries. The stillness that settles when you stop performing. You'll notice it right away. Fewer messages, less noise. The people who once pulled at you constantly start to retreat. It's not that they're gone, it's that they don't know how to navigate your new self. The one who doesn't explain, the one who doesn't ask for permission to set a limit, the one who no longer fills the silence with validation. And that silence, it feels empty at first. It feels like loss, like exile, like you've traded connection for something colder. But give it time. That silence becomes a sanctuary, because it's not emptiness, it's clarity. It's space you finally reclaimed, space you can now fill with intention instead of obligation. You'll notice that some people disappear. Let them. Their presence was never rooted in respect. It was dependent on your self-abandonment, on your need to please, on your constant availability. Now that you've stopped being easy to consume, they've lost interest. And that's not rejection, that's revelation. They weren't here for you. They were here for your compliance. This is what happens when you reclaim your power. The ground shifts, your energy changes, and the people who only knew how to approach the old version of you, the one who never said no, who never pushed back, who made space for everyone but themselves, those people start to feel disoriented. And some of them leave. Good. Let them walk. because this new version of you doesn't owe comfort to those who thrived off your silence. But this isn't about bitterness. This is about recognition that what you tolerated was never love, that what you allowed was never mutual, that all those moments you thought were kindness were really you abandoning yourself for harmony that was never real. And now, with that awareness, something radical happens. You begin to build something you've never truly had: sovereignty. A state where your emotions aren't public property, where your attention is deliberate, where your time is no longer an open door but a guarded gate. This is the beginning of your quiet reign, not over others, but over yourself. Because real respect doesn't start with others, it starts inside, with the decision to no longer betray your own instincts just to maintain someone else's comfort, with the decision to stop fixing what isn't yours to fix, with the strength to hold silence when your old self would have filled it with apologies, with explanations, with pleading. And that's the hard part. Choosing yourself in real time. Choosing stillness over justification. Choosing exit over endurance. Choosing dignity over approval. That's where the real battle lives, not in big dramatic moments, but in those tiny decisions where you choose not to shrink. You'll feel tempted sometimes to go back, to soften your words again, to answer out of guilt, to reach out when silence would have been power, and you might. You might slip once or twice, but something in you will catch it, a voice that wasn't there before, one that whispers, "You've come too far to shrink again." That voice, that's the echo of your new self, the one born not from pride or anger, but from awareness, from seeing what was done to you when you allowed yourself to be too available, too agreeable, too soft in a world that only remembers what resists. Because here's what Machiavelli understood: authority doesn't beg, it doesn't over-explain, it doesn't send follow-ups or seek to be understood. Authority makes its presence felt by what it withholds, and the world adjusts, or it walks away. Both are wins. And you'll begin to realize something even more profound. You don't need as much from the world anymore, not because you've become indifferent, but because you've become full, not full of ego, full of clarity, full of quiet power, full of the peace that comes from no longer betraying yourself. That's what makes you untouchable, not your toughness, not your ability to fight, but your refusal to be moved by noise, your unwillingness to negotiate your standards, your capacity to observe without reacting, to hear without absorbing, to be present without being consumed. Because what makes a person powerful isn't how loud they are, it's how unshakable they've become. It's how little they need to perform. It's the way they can walk into a room and say nothing, but still control the energy. That's not arrogance, that's self-respect, matured, hardened, forged through years of self-abandonment finally reversed. And from that place, you don't chase anymore. You don't seek validation. You don't beg for invitations. You're not in every room because you don't need to be. You don't say yes to every plan because you no longer fear missing out. You say yes to yourself, and that is enough. People feel that shift, even those who can't articulate it. They notice they can't speak to you the same way, can't expect the same emotional discounts, can't rely on your silence to protect their comfort. And some will push back. Some will test your boundaries again. Not out of malice, but because you trained them to expect your surrender. Your old self was predictable, pleasant, cooperative. Your new self, steady, is selective, silent when necessary. And that silence is your armor. Not because you're hiding, but because you're conserving, preserving, protecting the inner resources that you once gave away without question. And here's the final truth, the one that no quote, no book, no workshop really prepares you for. Once you've seen the trap, you can't unsee it. Once you've felt the strength of holding your ground, you can never fully go back to crawling. Once you've tasted the clarity of a boundary enforced, the chaos of boundarylessness becomes unbearable. You are no longer who you were, and that transformation will feel lonely at first, but it won't last. Because eventually, something amazing happens. People start to match your frequency. They begin speaking to you differently, treating you with a new respect. Not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. And the ones who can't, they fall away. No argument, no breakdown, just silence, and you don't chase them. Because you finally understand that losing people who only loved your weakness is not a loss at all. That's your rebirth. And from this point on, your world starts to reflect your new standard. Conversations change, dynamics evolve, invitations shift. You're no longer asked to perform emotional labor. You're not expected to fill in the blanks, to soften your truths, to be everything for everyone. You get to just be. And that's where your real power lives, in being without apology. So here's what you do next. You stop explaining, you stop performing, you stop asking for space and start taking it. You stop softening your edges just to be held by people with no grip. You move through the world with a new rhythm, slower, sharper, quieter. Because respect is not something you say, it's something you radiate. You no longer fight for attention, because those who matter already know how to see you. You no longer respond to every poke, because your peace is no longer up for grabs. You no longer give everyone access to your heart, because you understand that not everyone has clean hands. And that's the moment it all shifts. Not when you scream, not when you prove a point, but when you simply stop being what others expect and start becoming who you are, fully, fearlessly, finally. So, if you feel something stirring inside you now, if there's a quiet discomfort growing into a resolve, trust it. That's your evolution. That's the part of you that's no longer okay with crumbs. That's the voice that says, "We're done asking. From now on, we declare." And when you live that way, not out of aggression but out of alignment, the world notices. You don't need applause, you don't need permission, you don't even need understanding. What you need is to be able to look in the mirror and see someone you respect. That's your compass now. That's your North Star. And from today forward, you don't explain that to anyone, because you finally understand the truth. Respect begins in silence. And from that silence, something indestructible is born. Not noise, not validation, not attention, but presence. Pure, grounded, untouchable presence. And that is the new you.